Day one, baby.
Day one.
To this day. To this day. To this day. To this day.
We're covering today's top boxing news. This is our second installment of mental illness in boxing, a comprehensive study intended to understand some of the behaviors we see from a particular faction of fans who cannot be reasoned with.
No.
They are beyond reasoning capability, thus they are unreasonable. Any pursuit of reasoning is a lost cause. I give you Raekwon Bell.
OGB.
Okay,
I like Gary Russell
okay.
Jr. He's one of my favorite boxers. But Lomachenko dominated him 11 rounds to 1. Completely whooped his ass.
That's a lie, bro. That's a lie. If you go back and watch that fight, I had it 5 to 7 rounds for Wilder. That's a lie. You hating on that much because the fight was.
You had it 7 rounds for
Wilder knocked him down twice.
Dude, I'm not talking about Wilder. I'm talking about Russell Jr. versus Lomachenko.
Okay, so you talking about
Raekwon Bell is a very big Deontay Wilder fan. He's very passionate about this boxer.
This man has presented you 40 knockouts, and y'all not even happy with that. All y'all do is hail this black man.
Makes these appearances to protect Deontay Wilder, defend his honor. He's a very big fan of him.
Supposedly.
So big that he can't name at least 4 to 5 of Wilder's opponents off the top of his head.
What we're going to do, right, you and I, right, we're going to go till the end. We're each going to name an opponent of Deontay Wilder.
Spotty!
Okay.
So you can start first. Name one of his opponents.
Blaine Burn.
Okay. Dominic Breazeale, your turn.
Luis Ortiz.
Tyson Fury, your turn.
Okay. I know. John Brazil. Hold on, I'll be back.
Man, you're stupid, bro.
I'm just fucking joking. I know opponents.
One would assume that when an individual carries on the way that Raekwon carries on, when it comes to Wilder, that he'd know this fighter's career, he'd know his resume like the back of his hand, as he appears to be a big fan of him.
Is he?
He is certainly interested in defending this fighter's honor, defending his career thus far, even though he doesn't seem to know very much about this fighter's career.
The fuck?
Blaine Burn.
Okay. Dominic Breazeale, your turn.
Luis Ortiz.
Tyson Fury, your turn.
Okay. I know. Hold on, I'll be back.
Man, you're stupid, bro.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, accents the mental illness of Raekwon Bell. He seems to be very passionate when it comes to Deontay Wilder. He just doesn't seem to know very much about him. Outside of Deontay being the same race as Raekwon, I mean, that seems to be Raekwon's area of expertise. That seems to be the area of his comprehensive study, his focus. Seems to be what he is most educated in, well-versed in.
What?
As far as a boxing conversation, he doesn't seem to know very much about the sport of boxing or how boxing pertains to a discussion about Deontay Wilder, but, you know, he's a fan of him. Make of that what you will. To truly gauge the extent of Raekwon's mental illness, one must acquaint themselves with how it is Raekwon carries on in conversation.
Respect you. I don't respect you. I don't respect you. You're a disgrace. You as a human being are a disgrace.
Time out,
My mother died last year. My mother died last year. My mother died last year. My mother died last year.
Man, shut the fuck up, nigga. She love black cock like me, nigga. Shut the fuck. I'm gone. Fuck it. Fuck y'all. LDC. Hey, pussy bitch. Hey, motherfucker. Fuck you, nigga. I stand for black people, nigga. Fuck you. Don't ever fucking speak on Deontay Wilder name, little bitch. Little pussy bitch.
Now you see how passionate this guy gets when Deontay Wilder's name is brought up in conversation, when certain anecdotes, criticisms are levied towards Deontay Wilder in reference to his professional boxing career.
Okay.
You see how this guy reacts to that stuff, even though this guy can't name 4 to 5 guys that Deontay Wilder has fought. This guy doesn't actually know Deontay Wilder's career, and how that accents his mental illness is when he's talking about Deontay Wilder, he's not talking about a boxer and he's not talking about boxing. He projects himself onto this boxer because he identifies with him. Thus, if criticism is being levied towards someone that he identifies with, he takes that as a personal assault on himself and his character which he is severely lacking. As the subject at hand isn't actually you or anyone the same race as you per se, that's not the focus of the conversation. The focus of the conversation is boxing, whereas for you, it is something else entirely. This individual is unable to distinguish one from the other. All he sees is himself, as this is an individual who is hurting, though he's not hurting for the reasons he'd have you believe. There is a reason that an individual like this, and rest assured, he's not alone. There are several of these kinds of individuals in the YouTube boxing community and social media, out in the street, walking amongst us. There are several of these kinds of individuals, and there is a reason that what they're really doing is making a situation that's not related to them about them in some scope, some form, or fashion. We're gonna get to what that reason is.
Hey, pussy bitch. Hey, fat motherfucker. Fuck you, nigga. I stand for black people, nigga. Fuck you. Don't ever fucking speak on Deontay Wilder name, little bitch. Little fat pussy bitch. You know what? I stand for black people, nigga. Like you don't, nigga. Little faggot bitch. Say my name right now, nigga. I'm part of LDBC, nigga. We stand up for black.
Neither Brendan Taylor, Mark from Unrivaled Boxing Talk, L-Dog, or any of the panelists were attacking anyone on the premise of race.
None of them.
In fact, they weren't actually attacking anyone at all. They were discussing the professional boxing careers of professional boxers, and it is Raekwon Bell who immediately alluded to race. Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think he's really doing that? Do you actually think that Raekwon is an activist for civil rights?
No.
In any scope, in any form, any fashion, any capacity?
No.
Do you actually think that's the nature of his problem?
No.
When neither Brendan Taylor, Unrivaled Boxing Talk, or any of the panelists were discussing race or bashing anyone on the premise of race? Do you actually think that's what Raekwon's problem is? Because I'm here to tell you, that's not Raekwon's problem. I want to preface everything I'm about to say with this. Racism in America not only exists, but it is a very real and prevalent problem, even here today in 2020. But don't be fooled by the likes of Raekwon Bell thinking that's the nature of his problem.
It's not.
It's the people that he is insulting, threatening, and shouting expletives at aren't bashing anyone on the premise of race. In fact, many of their favorite fighters happen to be the same race as Raekwon. Yet he's the one who's going on the attack when it comes to race. Thus, race and racism isn't actually the nature of Raekwon's problem. You want to know what Raekwon's problem is?
He's a fucking loser.
And he's a loser with an inferiority complex. He's a loser who doesn't actually have anything going for him.
That's it?
Oh, I know, that sounds a little bit too simple. I know you might be thinking, are you sure?
That's it?
Yeah, that's what it is. He's a loser who doesn't have anything going for him.
Loser!
And because he's a loser who doesn't have anything going for him, he overcompensates by attaching himself to the success of others who he identifies with. In this instance, Deontay Wilder. It's for this reason that he views any criticisms in reference to Wilder's career as a personal attack on him. He thinks he's the one being attacked, as this is an individual that he identifies with. In essence, he's not actually talking about boxing, and in many ways, he's not actually talking about Wilder either. He's actually talking about himself, as he has to allude to the one thing he has in common with someone he identifies with. And it's not that he's a boxer, it's not that he's from Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Is he?
I don't think.
Doesn't sound like it.
Doesn't have the accent. The only thing he has in common with the likes of a Deontay Wilder is that they both happen to be the same race.
Pretty much.
And this kind of a mental illness is 1 part associative disorder, 2 parts indignant stupidity. That's right, as even the mentally ill are still capable of some higher function, some kind of hierarchy of thought. I reference John Forbes Nash,
An economist.
the biopic made about him, A Beautiful Mind, to where this is a schizophrenic individual, but he was also
An economist.
mathematician and a professor of journalism at Columbia University. It's for this reason I characterize Raekwon Bell's particular situation, his particular case, as a case of 1 part mental illness and 2 parts indignant stupidity, as being mentally ill doesn't make you stupid by default. The stupid part, that's your fault.
That's you, buddy.
That, in a very general sense, the mentally ill are not stupid. They don't have to be. The mentally ill aren't stupid, whereas Raekwon is so stupid that he's mentally ill. If that makes sense.
My issue is when they put that above, so much above boxing that they don't even talk about boxing. Like a lot of LGBT content I've come across, it's not really centered around boxing or the sweet science. We're in the YouTube boxing community, so when I listen to a boxing video, I want to hear about the sweet science, the fight game, and I just feel like, from my experience, from when I deal with people in the LDBC, the boxing isn't the talk isn't centered around boxing. It's centered around agendas within boxing, but not boxing itself. Does that make sense?
Okay, I understand that.
Do you?
Understand that, but at the end of the day, they like to protect blackface. Like I like to protect blackface. So I found common ground with it. Those are my brothers.
Who the fuck cares if those are your brothers? You know, this goes back to what I've been telling you guys for 2 to 3 fucking years now, that the boxing fan is discussing boxing amongst the other boxing fans.
That's what they're doing.
Whereas these guys, their concern isn't boxing at all, thus they have no place in the conversation. That if your
Opinions on boxing.
anecdotes on the sport are limited to talking up fighters the same race as you, then you're not having a conversation about boxing at all. While you might have 2 guys discussing facts by the numbers, names, dates, top 10 fighters, world titles held, world titles unified, title defenses, number of world champions unseated, defeated, while you might have 2 guys having that kind of conversation,
About boxing.
the most this guy can add to the conversation is talking up fighters, not on the premise of their professional records, not on the premise of facts and stats, but on the premise they're the same race as him.
What?
Who fucking cares? You're basically admitting that you're biased and that you are incapable of giving an even assessment on the sport, as you are admittedly partial to anyone the same race as you, and that might mean the world to you.
It might.
But what the fuck is that supposed to mean to me?
Nothing.
What's the hierarchy of thought here? What's the logic? That I'm supposed to say that fighter A is better than fighter B, not because he has a better professional record or anything along those lines as this Raekwon Bell guy. He don't know the ball from the bounce. He don't know a right cross from a crosswalk, this guy. This guy don't know Bert Cooper from Henry Cooper.
Idiot.
Guy don't know Sonny Banks from Sonny Liston. He knows nothing about the sport. But I'm supposed to say that fighter A is better than fighter B because he's the same race as Raekwon?
The fuck?
At the end of the day, they like to protect blackface. Like I like to protect blackface. So I found common ground with it. Those are my brothers.
Nobody fucking cares who your brothers are. Look, here on the relay,
We've seen this.
we know that this hierarchy of thought is not exclusive to any one group. We've dealt with Caucasian individuals who have a bias towards Caucasian fighters. The same is true of certain Asian individuals,
Pacquiao fan.
Latino individuals, Mexican boxing fans that have a bias towards Mexican boxers. And I told those guys all the fucking time, if all you're gonna tell me is that you like a guy because he's from the same place as you or he's the same race as you, then you're not actually talking boxing, and whatever you got to say don't mean a goddamn fucking thing to me, and it doesn't belong in a conversation about boxing, as you're not talking about boxing. You're talking about what you've got in common with somebody else. That has no bearing over the boxing. And that common denominator between you and that boxer might mean the world to you, but it don't mean shit to somebody else. Thus, it is not an even ground to discuss the sport. And discussing the sport, it's not these kinds of individuals' concern. In the case of Raekwon Bell, that is put on full display as his indignant and morbid stupidity, shouting expletives, hurling threats, and his
ramblings,
latent homosexuality.
A black cock like me, nigga. A black cock like me, nigga. Black cock like me, nigga.
He confessed. He loves black cock. That can explain these disproportionate responses in reference to a fighter that he really doesn't know nothing about. Because lest we forget, this guy can't name 3 or 4 of Deontay Wilder's opponents off the top of his head, yet he appears to be a very big fan of him. One might feel so inclined to ask, what is he actually a fan of?
His cock.
Doesn't seem to be his career. Doesn't know much about his career.
Little black cock like me, nigga. Little black cock like me, nigga. Shut the fuck, I'm gone. Fuck it.
That is called a Freudian slip, an unintentional error regarded as revealing subconscious feelings. And what are Raekwon's subconscious feelings? He loves cock. Black cock. He loves Deontay Wilder's cock. What he imagines is Deontay Wilder's cock. I'm not sure that he's seen it, though I have no doubts that he's dreamt about it. This Freudian slip is indicative of what lies underneath the surface of Raekwon's psyche, some latent homosexual tendencies that might explain these disproportionate responses in reference to a fighter he doesn't actually know very much about. And what are you getting so upset for when it comes to Wilder? I don't understand. If you yourself, who are a fan of this guy, supposedly, if you yourself can't even name 4 or 5 guys that he's fought before, if you don't know this guy's career well enough to name 4 or 5 guys that he's actually fought before, then what the fuck are you getting so upset when somebody else is talking about him? You don't know him any better than they do. In fact, they might know more about him than you do. But the truth about what Raekwon Bell is actually mad about is revealed. Between being 1 part mentally ill and 2 parts indignantly stupid, latent homosexual tendencies, we see what he's really mad about. He doesn't like that people are saying not so nice things about his man crush's pro-career. But it's not the pro aspect of it, the pro-career part of it. It's not that part he's consigned with, as he himself doesn't know much about that aspect. He doesn't know much about Wilder's pro-career. What he knows is he has an affinity, a fixation, infatuation with that guy, and he doesn't want anybody talking about his guy.
No.
Not unless they're lavishing compliments towards his object of desire. In short, the proper way to deal with this kind of an individual is to not deal with them at all, as they don't have enough knowledge of the sport to gain a successful platform on their own. They must attach themselves to someone else in order to gain an audience and thereby try to validate themselves. As I reiterate, this individual does have an inferiority complex. Thus, dealing with this individual is not complex at all. You just don't. You don't give him any air. You don't waste your time. As you cannot hope to get through to anyone with this kind of morbid and indignant stupidity.
Oh, it's good for a laugh, but not much else.